and welcome to the Shadowland Podcast. I am your host, Dr. William Lester, and I want to thank you for joining us for another show. Also want to thank you for listening to our first two podcast episodes. As a reminder, each of our podcasts will be available for listening on YouTube and on the Facebook page of the American Institute of Metaphysics. And either way, you can listen to the podcast on those websites, or you can download them as an MP3 file and listen to them at your leisure. And that will be very convenient for you. And if you are becoming a fan or turning into a fan or already a fan, you can build your library up of these podcasts, and we hope that you find them fun and interesting and entertaining. So, what's on tap for today? I wanted to jump into one of the subjects that I find very fascinating, and that is examples of UFO encounters in the Bible. Yeah. I've always found that very interesting because I think it explains a lot of what has come down to us in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I understand that for some people, it's just a place that they don't want to go. But I think that attitude simply flies in the face of all the information we have set out in front of us. And so just let me put this out. Let me just put this out here out front so everybody understands where we're coming from. Our position is that many of the phenomena that are referred to in biblical writings about objects coming and going here and there, in the air, in the sky, these biblical references, we feel, are referring to technologically advanced vehicles, craft, that are being misinterpreted, misidentified, misunderstood by the people of that day, of those days. And this is not even a far-fetched concept at all. I'll give you the analogy that I like to give. You take your wireless device, your laptop, your tablet, your Android phone, your iPhone, whatever it is you have, your MP3 player. You take that technology and you go back in time 1,000 years. And you see what the people of those times think of it. Are they going to understand that it represents technological breakthrough? Are they going to even understand it as technology? No. They're going to ascribe some mystical property to it. Supernatural. You may even be accused of sorcery or witchcraft. You get the point. So, one of the things one has to remember is the following thing. When a person is confronted with something that is more or less outside of their sphere of understanding, their context, their worldview, they will often describe it according to the cutting edge technology of their day, whatever it is. And that leads us to the first term that I want to look at with respect to these UFOs in the Bible, and that is the word chariot, because that's a word that comes up again and again, not just in the Bible, but in many ancient writings. But obviously chariots were state-of-the-art method of transportation in antiquity. Now, there are multiple verses describing chariots as vehicles in the Bible. So let's look at a few of them. In the book of Kings, talk about the spinning chariots of fire that take Elijah. And it says that, there appeared chariots of fire and horses of fire. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind. Okay? Then it says Elijah and Elisha are talking, and suddenly a bright flying vehicle and a cavalry of bright flying objects appear, and Elijah ascends into the sky by a spinning flying vehicle. Keep going a little further, talking about Elisha. And it says, one or more flying objects descended to the ground, and Elisha asked Jehovah to cause blindness to befall the surrounding army, which he does. The army is captured, and later Jehovah restores their sight. But it doesn't just stop there. Go to the book of Psalms, where it describes, quote, thousands of flying vehicles. It says the chariots of God are 20,000. 20,000. In Jeremiah, it says the chariots of God spin and fly swiftly as a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Zechariah, flying vehicles from the sky. There came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were, quote, mountains of brass. Really? So we're describing already metal objects, right? Let's go to the next term. The term that's used in the Old Testament is dwellings. Now, this is totally ignored by mainstream religion. And it's almost like they're giving you the actual residence of, quote, God, which is an object in the sky. Houses, habitations, pavilions, dwellings, sanctuaries in the sky show that these flying vehicles are at least the temporary home for the Elohim and other beings of that realm. In Deuteronomy, it says, look down from the holy habitation. So it's almost like a home in the sky. Samuel talks about darkness, pavilions, dark waters, thick clouds. In the Chronicles, it says that Jehovah listens from his sky dwelling. Jehovah watches from his sky dwelling. The Lord looketh from heaven. It's how it's articulated there. So you see how these things are presented. Let's go to the next term. The term is pillars. And this first crops up in the book of Exodus, okay? When it talks about the Lord going before them by day in a, quote, pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. And I think this is in reference to leading the Israelites. Then it says the same pillar of cloud and pillar of fire harasses the Egyptians. This object, or these objects, also perform an aerial flanking movement between the Israelites and the Egyptians. It's incredible. Then in Deuteronomy, the Lord appears in the pillar. In Nehemiah, it says, flying craft of the Exodus. The pillar of fire gave them light, and it came down upon Mount Sinai and spoke with them. So this is not even sketchy. This is not even sporadic. These references are all over the place. Now let's talk about clouds. There are about 70 verses describing clouds as vehicles. Now you should not get caught up in the word cloud by comparing it to real clouds, to actual clouds. But in this instance, the word cloud is being used by people in lieu of another word. These are vehicles. They're the most common description of the flying vehicles of the Elohim. Okay, and that's not surprising if you consider the probable size and density, in daylight hours attributed to these objects. Now, between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, there were certainly no solid flying objects up in the sky. And the only things that people would see were thunder or storm clouds. So that's a logical relation to make. Again, go back to the book of Exodus. They looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Moses went into the midst of the cloud. In other words, Moses got on board. Moses goes up into the craft that is covering the mountain and enters it. And this is not the only instance of people going into these crafts. In the book of Numbers, the vehicle provides shade and light. The cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Now we keep hearing this over and over. Providing a source of light at night. That's why they're referring to that as pillar of fire. We have constant examples of these vehicles ascending and hovering for extended periods of time. In Chronicles, they talk about the house was filled with a cloud, so that the priest could not stand to minister by reason of the cloud. In other words, it was a huge distraction. So this is something that is very remarkable, very remarkable. Now let's talk about spinning objects. Spinning objects. Job says the Lord answered out of the whirlwind. Book of Psalms talks about the Elohim spinning wheel. Over and over and over and over. One of the most often referenced examples, of course, is the book of Ezekiel. The glowing, spinning, metallic craft. A whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and brightness was about it. The color of amber is how it's described. A rushing, windy, great thundercloud-like flying craft flew out of the north. The vehicle had the appearance of brilliant, glowing fire all around it. The center of the illumination, the vehicle, was like polished metal. Amos talks about a whirling vehicle. So these are just a few examples. These are just a few examples. What about the beings? What about the beings that are operating these vehicles, these craft? Well, the most commonly referred to, or the most often referred to, are what we call angels. So let's talk about this for a minute, because you rarely get a chance to think about this outside of theological parameters, right? So we know angels are the messengers and the most physically present of the spiritual beings in the world of the Elohim. The Old Testament word is, or the word used in the Old Testament is malak, pronounced like malak, which just means to dispatch as a deputy or a messenger, specifically of God. They serve the Elohim, although not in total perfection. They're not gods, but they are the protectors of the Elohim and mankind. They are not described as having wings, halos, harps, or anything attributed to the Orthodox portrayal in paintings and other theological representations. They can appear in the flying vehicles and are often in some form of what you might consider a brilliantly adorned uniform. There are two ranks, with the archangel being the superior rank. Now, angels appear almost 200 times in the Bible. So the entries that we want to deal with right here, right now, are strictly those related to the appearance in the sky, vehicles, or close encounter type situations. Now, the concept that man was, quote, made a little lower than the angels, which we've all heard, which is stated in the book of Psalms, that's all based on a mistranslation. Because the word angel is taken from the same word as Elohim, therefore it's properly rendered a little lower than the gods. Okay, so a lot of this gets down to translating or translations. So obviously we have in the book of Genesis, an angel calls from the sky, for example, calling out to Hagar from the sky. The angels in the story of Jacob's ladder. You remember that? Where the angels are ascending and descending from the sky. Back to the book of Exodus, we have the burning bush. The angel appears in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And the bush was not consumed. Psalms even refers to what we might consider evil aliens. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them. Book of Daniel refers to the angel Gabriel being caused to fly swiftly. The angel Gabriel flies swiftly. Jumping ahead into the New Testament, book of Luke, clarifies this. It says, the angel answered, said, I am Gabriel that stand in the presence of God, and I am sent to speak unto thee and show thee these glad tidings. So, again, we have these angels as one category of being. So, there's a lot here that we can go into. And I think what would be cool to do is to kind of break this up and spread this out over a couple of the next few podcasts. Because I'd like to kind of go through this with you. And obviously it's not something that we can cover in one podcast. But I do want to, before we close up for this episode, I do want to say that this idea is not just one that is restricted to biblical writings. Because very similar accounts can be found during these same time periods among the Chinese. And there's even an account from India, and we're talking about 4000 BC, all right, where we have these very dramatic encounters. And again, we see the word chariot. And the word vimana, which refers to these flying machines that navigated at great heights with the aid of quicksilver and a great propulsive wind. So we'll look at these and more on a future podcast. So, lots to think about. And I want to thank all of you for listening to the Shadowland Podcast. And I want to invite you to visit the American Institute of Metaphysics at www.instituteofmetaphysics.com. Also, check out the Institute of Metaphysics Facebook page, because there's always fun things going on up there. If you have not heard the first two other podcasts, please do so. We will try to get this one polished up and ready to go on to YouTube and up on Facebook. So, this has been the Shadowland Podcast. I will see you again on the flip side.